Okay, in this video, you are going to learn how to simplify radicals, which is a skill that you will need for next year if you move on to geometry. So before you continue with this video, you need to complete the day 156 warm-up and go formative. So put pause on this video, complete this warm-up, and then continue with the notes. All right, so like I said, we are simplifying radicals. This is something you need for geometry. And in your warm-up for today, which you should have already completed, I asked you to take the squares from the numbers 1 all the way to 15. So you were just squaring each number. And what that does is it creates the list of perfect squares. So all these numbers in purple were your answers for your warm-up. All these numbers right here are your perfect squares. You need to be familiar with these numbers. You need to have this list whenever you're trying to simplify radicals. So I have this right here on the side of my examples, and I'm going to show you how we do this. So it's very simple. First thing you want to do is you want to find 2 factors of 28 or whatever number they're giving you. But one of those numbers has to come from the list of perfect squares, and it has to be the biggest number on this list as a factor of 28. So I'm going to look for 2 numbers. I'm going to put radicals on both of them because I'm taking the square root of 28. I'm looking for factors of 28. 2 numbers that I can multiply to give me 28. One of them has to be from this list. So it's a pretty easy number, 28. So you should know your multiplication tables. 7 times 4 is going to give me 28. And 4 is in my list of perfect squares. So the number that comes from your list is the number that you put down first. So 4 times 7 is going to give me that 28. And then I just take the square root of 4, because it's in the list, it should be perfect. It should give me a whole number. The square root of 4 is 2. 7 is not anywhere in the list, so that one's not perfect. If you type that in decimals, it gives you a decimal. So it has to stay with the radical. So this is my simplified answer, 2 square root of 7. Okay, one more example. 60, I'm looking for 2 numbers that multiply to give me 60, but one of them has to be from this list. So 60 is a little bit harder. You might be able to see it. If not, here's what you do. If you have a hard time knowing which numbers work, I'm going to take that number 60 and I'm going to divide with the biggest number in my purple list that does not go over the 60. So 64 goes over. So I'm going to start with 49. I'm going to divide 60 divided by 49. And you can use decimals, of course. So 60 divided by 49. If it gives you a decimal, it is not a factor. So that doesn't work. Next number of my list is 36. So I'm going to take 60 divided by 36. Gives me a decimal. It doesn't work. Move on to 25. 60 divided by 25. You should be able to tell kind of for some of them if they work or not. This is not going to work. 60 divided by 25. Didn't work. Next one is 16. 60 divided by 16. Decimal doesn't work. So if you don't know your tables, this is something you had to do. 60 divided by 9, 60 divided by 4 until you find the right one. So 60 divided by 9, decimal doesn't work. 60 divided by 4, whole number, this one works. So it's going to be the 4 from the list of perfect squares in that 15 right there. So 4 times 15 is going to give me 60. And then I just simplify the square root of 4 because it came from my list. It gives me 2. This one is not anywhere in my list, so it stays the same. And that's my answer. Okay, 80. So same thing. I'm still working with my list of perfect squares. You need to have this next to you so that you can work these problems. Factors of 80, I'm looking for 2 numbers that multiply to give me 80. Okay, so if you don't know, again, you would start with dividing by 64, 49, 36. And if you keep doing that, you'll find out that it's 16. 16 goes first because it's from my list, times 5 gives me 80. 16 times 5 gives me 80. And so the square root of 16, it's 4. 5 is not on the list, so stays the same, square root of 5. All right, one more. So on this one, I don't want you to copy this yet. But for this one, common mistake that I see on numbers like this, it's a small number, so a lot of students are good at knowing their multiplication. They say, oh, 4 times 8. 4 times 8 gives me 32. 4 is in my list. And so they go on and work it out. But this is wrong. This is not simplified. The reason why it's wrong is because earlier I told you I want to find 2 factors and I want one of the numbers to be in the list. That works. But I also told you it has to be the biggest number on the list. So even though 4 is a factor of 32, it's not the biggest factor that's on this list. So this is going to be wrong. Again, if you start with the biggest number without going over and start dividing, then you should not get these problems wrong. So biggest number on this purple list without going over 32 is 25. So I'm going to divide 32 divided by 25. Just to show you, it's not going to work, but I'm going to show you. 32 divided by 25 gives me a decimal, doesn't work. Move on. 32 now divided by 16. That one works, it's 2. So this 16 was bigger than 4, so I have to use this one. 16 times 2 is going to give me 32. 16 should go first because it's on my list of perfect squares. And so the square root of 16 gives me 4. This one stays the same. So be really careful when you're finding factors. You always want the biggest number. That's why we always start with the largest one. We start dividing and we start moving up the list until we find it. All right, for this one, 29, square root of 29. 36 goes over, so I'm going to start with 25. 29 divided by 25. 29 divided by 25 gives me a decimal. It doesn't work. Next one is 16. Decimal, it doesn't work. Didn't work, didn't work. Next is 9, 4, and then 1. So let's see if they work. 29 divided by 9. Didn't work. Divided by 4. Doesn't work. Divided by 1 gives me 29. So if you notice, it's the exact same number, right? So when that happens, this is a prime number, meaning there's no 2 numbers you can multiply other than 1 to get 29. So when that happens, your answer just stays as it is, right? Square root of 1 is just 1, but remember the 1s are invisible. You don't put the 1s, so it just stays as it is. You cannot simplify it anymore. So sometimes that happens. If you have a prime number, that happens. Sometimes they're gonna give you something that's already perfect. The square root of 44, it's already perfect. If you notice, it's in the list. So square root of 44 gives me 12. So just type it in decimals if you don't know. It's square root of 44. 144. Gives you 12. Shows you right there, it's 12. Let's look at this last one more. So on this one, my number is 256. So I'm going to start with the 225. I'm going to start dividing. See if I find something that works. 256 divided by 225. So especially divide like this whenever they're big numbers. I know a lot of you guys, if it's smaller numbers, you're very good with your multiplication tables and you don't have to divide. But if you struggle, then start dividing. That one gave me a decimal. It doesn't work. 225 didn't work. 196, 169. Work. 169 didn't work. And so you go up your list like that. I'm going to tell you what it is. You didn't go through all of them. The one that works is 64. So I'm going to show you. 256 divided by 64. it gave me 4. So 64 and 4. Okay, 64 times 4 gives me 256. Square root of 64, because it's on my list, it's a perfect square, it's 8. But if you notice, 4 is also in my list. It's also a perfect square. Now this gives me a 2. Keep my multiplication symbol in the middle, and so now I have to multiply. 8 times 2 is 16. So this one is also a perfect square. It's not in the list. That was the next number that came up. 16 squared is 256. So if it doesn't appear in your list and you don't know that it's a perfect square, then you can still find the factors and then get to your answer. Okay. So those are all the examples I'm going to work out. And so now you are going to complete the day 156 practice. Make sure you show work for all of them. The work is just showing me this. Show me what factors you're using and then type your final answer.